The Grand Army of the Republic was one of the greatest fighting forces in the history of the galaxy, virtually unparalleled in terms of the sheer skill of its average soldiers. This is to be expected. After all, the clones of the GAR were specifically engineered by the Kaminoans to be the perfect soldiers. But nurture is always much more of a factor in who we become than nature, and the ones who shape the clones into perfect soldiers are often forgotten. In this video, we're going to be telling the story of the forgotten clone trainers, specifically the ones who trained the Republic's clone commandos. There were 100 of them, gathered from all over the galaxy, beings that disappeared for 10 years to train clone commandos. In Mandoa, they were named the Cuy'val, those who no longer exist.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
By and large, the Kaminoans did a lot of the dirty work when it came to training the Grand Army's clones. The Regs were trained by a mixture of Kaminoan researchers, droids, and advanced computer simulations. To a degree, Jango Fett was also involved with the training of the regular clones, albeit mostly in the form of providing input on the Kaminoans' training regimens. But by and large, the Kaminoans believed their resources would be sufficient to train the rank-and-file clones, despite the fact that the Kaminoans didn't have much first-hand combat experience. Only once the Clone Wars broke out and the Kaminoans started to rush clones to the front lines did they bring in third-party trainers to help with the regs. As exemplified by Brick and El-Les, these trainers were usually just common bounty hunters. On the other hand, with the ARC troopers, the Kaminoans found they needed some help from the beginning. To help shape the ARCs into the perfect soldiers they were meant to be, the Kaminoans had them trained primarily by Jango Fett, whose experience they believed would come in handy. As there were only 100 of the original Alpha class ARC trooper line, Fett was able to handle the whole class by himself, and his influence ended up making the ARCs even more effective than the Kaminoans ever imagined they could be. But with their clone commandos, the Kaminoans had a bit of a problem. As with the ARCs, they didn't consider themselves experienced enough to properly train these advanced clone specimens. However, they were unable to bring in Jango Fett to make up for it. There were 10,000 clone commandos after all, and only one of Jango Fett, or at least one that was capable of training commandos. Jango couldn't train them all, and so the Kaminoans needed to bring in others. Fett ultimately solved the problem by recruiting 100 beings that would become the Cuy'val. These beings were bounty hunters, assassins, and mercenaries, battle-hardened warriors of the sort that mainstream Republic society shunned. Of them, 75 were Mandalorian, recruited from retirement, Mandalorian police forces, and in some cases, even the Death Watch, despite Jango's hatred for the group. Among the Mando Adder Fett recruited were the dirty fighter Kal Skirata, the brutally efficient Wallon Val, the Doctor Mij Gillimer, the journeyman protector Court Davin, the huntress Rav Bralor and Fonty Turfor, and the Death Watch fanatics Dread Priest and Isabet Rial. The other 25 were not Mandalorian, though all of them were humans. When Jango Fett brought these beings together, he named them Cuy'val, as, for all intents and purposes, they would cease to exist for the next 10 years. In his own words, "You're the best in your field. The best soldiers, tacticians, sappers, communicators, and survival experts. I picked you personally because I want you to train the best commandos in the galaxy. You'll have everything you need, whatever you want except one thing, home. This is a top secret project. You're not to tell anyone where you're going, and you're not to leave Kamino, ever. As far as your friends and family are concerned, you're already dead." With that, the Cuy'val set their affairs in order, headed off to Kamino, and got to work. Each of the Cuy'val was assigned a group of about 100 clone commandos to train, with few restrictions and encouragement to train them in whatever ways they saw fit. Some Cuy'val had unique skills that saw them run training sessions with other commandos as well. Mij Gillimer, for example, was a doctor, and he trained all of the commandos in battlefield medical techniques. The techniques and personalities of the Cuy'val greatly influenced the commandos they trained. This is why a lot of the clone commandos adopted Mandalorian culture, as they had been taught it by their instructors. Several of the Cuy'val, most notably Kal Skirata and Rav Bralor, treated their commandos as sons. Though the training exercises they put their men through were just as brutal as those most other commandos faced, they were compassionate nonetheless and encouraged their changes, something many other Cuy'val didn't bother to do. Their commandos grew fond of them as a result. Scarada, for example, was referred to as Cal Buia, or Papa Cal, by the clones in his charge, while Braylor's clones similarly looked upon her as a mother. These trainers often grew attached to their commandos in turn. Cal Scarada reportedly spent many a night hammered, ranting about the lives the commandos would never get to experience. Other Cuy'val were less compassionate. Walon Val was one of the most infamous of the Mandalorian trainers, as he firmly believed in starting commandos with live fire training from a very early age. Val's intent was to make the commandos into instinctual survivors, to give them an animalistic familiarity with what it's like to face death so as to better prepare them for battle. His tactics were seen by some as overtly vicious, as his live fire sessions often involved commandos facing off against each other. He did, however, always insist on personally being involved with these exercises and always offered commandos the opportunity to fight him instead of their brothers. Only one commando is known to have chosen this option, and he ended up in a Bacta tank for a month. Val and Scarada came to blows over this incident, which left Val with a broken nose. Let it not be said, however, that Walon Val was cruel or heartless. He had good intentions, which he described as follows. You have to know the limits of your physical and mental endurance so you can recognize them and pass beyond them. This is why I will push you beyond any suffering you can imagine. You will not give up and die like lesser men. You will not crack up like lesser men. You will not lose heart in the direst circumstances like lesser men. And you will be the last men standing when the weaklings have opted to do the easy thing and die. Val's brutal training style paid off. The clone commandos trained by Walon Val had a dramatically higher survival rate than their peers. Delta Squad, the most well-known clone commando group, was trained by him, and after Commando Sev went missing after the Battle of Kashyyyk, Val dedicated his life to finding him. But while Walon Val may have had his heart in the right place, there were other Cuy'val that likely didn't. Dread Priest and Isabet Rial, the Death Watch fanatics, were considered to be insane and bloodthirsty by many of their contemporaries, employing brutal training techniques that regularly killed commandos. The other Cuy'val also disliked them for their belief in Mandalorian supremacy, as both Priest and Rial wanted the Mandalorians to give conquering the galaxy another shot, something most other contemporary Mandalorians had rejected. During the training of the Commandos, Priest and Ryu secretly started a traditional Mandalorian battle circle, a fight club of sorts in which deadly force was allowed. They forced their commandos to face each other in the ring, encouraging brutal tactics that regularly sent clones to the infirmary. Fortunately for the clones, when Mij Gillamar caught wind of the battle circle from the injured clones, he informed Jango Fett, who beat the tar out of Priest and shut down his fight club. Unfortunately, this came too late for a number of badly wounded clones, who ultimately succumbed to their injuries. Regardless of their training styles, all of the Cuy'val had the same goal, to make the clone commandos as effective as humanly possible. They largely succeeded in that regard, as their former trainees proved to be a godsend for the Republic during the Clone Wars, especially at the start of the conflict. With the deployment of the Grand Army of the Republic in 22 BBY, the contract of the Cuy'val was up, and they were finally allowed to return home to their families, no longer officially dead. Most of them did, but there were a few that stayed on. Cal Scarada, most notably, continued to work with the Republic Special Operations Brigade, particularly with the Null-class ARC troopers we had raised and trained. Others continued to train new generations of clones in Alpha 17's Commander Training Program. Among these was Court Darvin, who unleashed Commander Bakara upon the galaxy, while Fonty Turfo was responsible for all the clones that liked dual-wield DC-17 pistols. Combat technique she was quite fond of. After the end of the Clone Wars, most of the Cuy'val that were left retired on Mandalore. A few of them got into some trouble after the war, most notably Dread Priest, who Cal Scarada finally got around to shanking and dumping in river. A few of the others were involved with Clan Scarada, which Cal expanded greatly by adopting the Null Arcs as his sons and accepting any and all clone deserters that found their way to his farm. So that's the story of the Cuy'val, the clone trainers that erased their lives for the GAR. But what do you think? Have you heard of this before? What did you find most interesting, and which training technique would you have taken with the clone commandos? Let us know in the comment section below. And just before you go guys, make sure you check out the description links below in which you can find the music we played in this video and in a lot of our recent video. There's some really good beats on our music channel and we're constantly updating it, so make sure you give that channel a subscribe. And if you want to support the channel and get access to the exclusive thumbnails we make for a lot of the videos, make sure you check us out on Patreon. You can help us for as little as $1 a month. And if you just want to join our wider Geetsly's community, make sure you check out our main Discord where you can chat to myself and others, and our Geetsly's gaming network where you can play games with other Star Wars fans. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.